Hi, I'm Mandy Gruhlkey, and this is Grateful by Lady Law, where I dive deep into the stories of the connections that have shaped the person I am today. The journey that started in a small town in Texas and led to courtrooms in Nebraska has been filled with life-changing encounters and lessons. Join me as we celebrate the highs and navigate the lows while we explore the rich tapestry of human connection. Hello and welcome to Grateful by Lady Law. This is the first intro of Grateful by Lady Law. We've already recorded 3 episodes with 3 guests, but as I started thinking about it, I was thinking maybe my listeners need to know a little bit more about me before we dive into the people that actually help make me who I am. So for this first introductory episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about me, which is actually really uncomfortable, but I think that my listeners need some context. Throughout the episode with the interviews of other people, you'll find out a lot deeper information about me. But for now, here's the gist of the timeline of my life and who I am. Um, so, first and foremost, I am an attorney in Omaha. I am proud of that. I've worked really hard to become an attorney. And so that's one of the first things I identify as a female attorney. My journey began to be an attorney at Creighton Law School here in Omaha. So when I first started going to Creighton, it was probably back in 2007. I was a non-traditional student, so I'd already been, I graduated 10 years before that. If you do the math, you'll find out my age. And during that time, I had graduated from undergrad with my high school English teaching degree, and I was working at a law firm in town, and there was an attorney there named Gordy Hotman, and he was a ray of sunshine. He's one of the people that I wish I could have on this podcast, but unfortunately he's passed away. But when I was talking to him about my career and becoming a teacher, he told me something that stuck with me. He said, "Look around this law firm, Mandy. If these guys can be a lawyer, you can be a lawyer." And I grew up in a small town in Texas. I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a few minutes. But hearing that from Gordy it planted a seed in my head that would never have been there before. I didn't think, growing up in a small town with not a lot of means, I didn't ever think that I could ever become an attorney. And to hear this from somebody that I respected meant a lot to me. So I ended up taking the LSAT, and that's the test you have to take to get into law school. So after I took the LSAT, it made me realize that, maybe I do have potential. Maybe I can do this. So then I started going to Creighton Law School. At Creighton, I had a lot of good connections. I met some friends that'll be friends for a lifetime. I also made some good connections with professors. And that was one of the things I realized quickly is that law school was a struggle for me. I had gone through some traumatic experiences before law school, but also just academically. I was used to getting straight A's, and it didn't come that easy. At law school, you have to analyze problems. There's a lot of subjectiveness to it. You write an essay, and then a teacher tells you what they think, or a professor tells you what they think. It isn't just a multiple choice quiz, which I was good at. And so it was kind of a learning curve for me. And so I identified with some professors that really started supporting me. One of them is one of the first interviews you'll hear from in this podcast, Professor Mangrum. He really took me under his wing. He's like a second dad to me here in Omaha. The other thing from law school that I learned about myself is that being connected with a network of people is important for a career. I started doing things that I normally wouldn't do. I joined certain committees and some of the social clubs that were, they connected lawyers and judges and law students. And I wasn't, I've always been a shy person. I am somewhat of an introvert. So doing these things outside of the box really were difficult for me, but I pushed myself to make those connections. And that's why after I graduated from law school, I really decided to stay in Omaha. I met judges and I met lawyers that inspired me, that showed me that it was important to be ethical, that it was important as an attorney to be kind and compassionate, and then always to, that your research and your writing and all of the things that a lawyer does, all of those things are important. And really, to be the best lawyer that you can be, really, you have to have a skill set that encompasses all those things. After I graduated from law school, actually, while I was in law school, I went and I clerked at the Sarpy County Public Defender's Office. And if anybody knows things about public defenders, a lot of times we get a bad rap. People would call us public pretenders. Our clients would treat us differently because some of the clients would say that the state was paying for us, so we weren't working as hard. And I will tell you that might be true of other public defenders' offices. I don't believe that, but I will tell you that in the Sarpy County Public Defender's Office, it's probably some of the best lawyers that I've ever encountered. I am so grateful for the time that I spent in that office. When I started, you have a ton of lawyers, a ton of lawyers in that office that have hundreds of cases, and it's crazy how they manage the scheduling. It blew my mind. I was just like, how do these attorneys know all these clients, know all the facts, know the legal arguments, but to watch them operate was really inspiring for me. One of the opportunities that I love the most there is that my boss told me that, do what you want. Go into the lawyers' offices, ask them what they need help on. And that I learned that in order to get where I wanted to be, I had to take that initiative, that these attorneys were so busy, they weren't gonna seek out my help even though they needed it. And so that's when I stepped into the office of, someone that has been just a huge inspiration in my life, Chris Lathrop. He's probably one of the best attorneys I know, and just a dear friend. And Chris taught me a lot of lessons. He taught me how to navigate the courthouse. He taught me the importance of being kind and respectful to everyone, court clerks, opposing counsel, but then also to never bend when you know that what your argument is you believe in. Um, Chris will be a guest here today, or not today, in the future, and I look forward to having my listeners hear from him as well. Um, while I was there with Chris, I had the opportunity, while I was in the public defender's office, I had the opportunity, with Chris to do to have a second-degree murder trial, and that was a huge thing for me. I second chaired that murder trial as a law clerk, and then we ended up appealing. We lost, when we appealed the verdict, and I argued in front of the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court, and we won, which is very rare on a criminal case, and it changed the law in Nebraska under the Castle Doctrine, which was such an impactful thing for my career. It gave me such confidence, and it made me realize that, I mean, that whole process took from the time the crime happened until we won the appeal was probably about 4 years. And so it just made me realize that the wheels of justice do turn slowly, but if you stay the course, that a lot of times you will get the results that justice prevails. So that was an experience that I'll take with me. And the other wonderful thing about working at the public defender's office is that I got to work with a variety of clients. One of the lessons I learned from my boss at the public defender's office is that when you have a client in front of you, a lot of people will probably judge them, because of the crime they committed. But if you look past the crime and you look at the person, you'll realize that we're here not because this is a bad person, but because they made bad decisions, because of bad behavior. And if you try to find out why, what motivated them to make this decision, a lot of times you can better defend them. And that was something that really spoke to me. I've always liked to look for the good in people. And by doing that as a public defender, as a criminal defense attorney, for people that have committed crimes or allegedly committed crimes, it helped me better represent them. And this was really true when I started working with the juvenile population. So once I graduated from law school, and then I was hired as an official public defender, I started out in juvenile court. And honestly, I think that's probably one of my favorite areas to practice in, because I would meet these naughty kids, and then I'd be in a room one-on-one with them, and I'd start talking to them, and I'd quickly try to make them realize that they can trust me, that I might be the only person on their side, that there to advocate for them and tell their story. And then I would almost see the child kind of melt a little, and really open up and really find out why these kids aren't going to school, are returning to drugs, were having assaultive behaviors. Because on every single client I had that was a juvenile, I strive to figure out the why. And then from that why to solve the problem and how to make this kid better. And then ended up going to, being promoted, I guess you could say, to misdemeanor court and then doing felonies. I still tried to find out the why of all of these people, no matter how old you are, no matter how old my clients were, as criminal defendants, really just trying to understand the motivation, and if there's anything that I could do to help them, not just in a legal way, but also it seemed like there was some social work component in that job. So after being at the public defender's office for probably about 7 or 8 years, I was approached by the Sarpy County prosecutor, and asked to change sides. And so that was a huge decision for me. I had to really do some soul searching and decide if that would be a good fit for me. And so what I did was really evaluate, just like I said before, figuring out the why, figuring out what the problem was for my clients, and then solving that problem. I felt like a prosecutor could actually help with that solution better. We've kind of somewhat gotten into a time where it's not just somebody commits a crime and we want to incarcerate them. Our jails and prisons are filling up. That's just, you're not helping the problem. So we're looking more to, um, helping with mental health issues. We're looking more for helping with substance abuse issues. And so I thought as a prosecutor, I'd have more control over what the outcome would be in these cases. And that rang true for the most part on many of the cases. I was able to, make sure that, I still represented the state. I represented the victims in crimes, but I also wanted to look at the whole picture and, if there was a conviction, make sure that the sentence made sense, so that this person didn't come back and keep committing crimes. So I was at the prosecutor's office for a couple years. My time in Sarpy County was amazing because I got to meet so many wonderful lawyers in both the prosecutor's office and the public defender's office. Like I said, I also met a wealth of amazing judges. There's really good judges that are seated in Sarpy County. There's a few female judges who I hope will be on this podcast someday, who really have been role models for me, that have been fair in their rulings, that listened to the people before them, that take time to make the right decisions or what they feel is the right decision. And so towards the end of my time at the prosecutor's office, I actually thought about becoming a judge. And then I was approached by a insurance defense firm. And so I did an interview with the insurance defense firm and thought that maybe that would be the best fit for me. Maybe, with my hope of maybe being a judge someday, if I did insurance defense, which is civil litigation, that would also help my resume so that when I, go before the governor in an interview to become a judge, that they would see that I've not only done both sides of the law on criminal matters, but I also have some civil knowledge and experience. So I went and worked for the criminal defense firm, which was a great experience. I worked with fantastic attorneys there too. Had a really good mentor in the experience. But the downfall of that was that COVID hit. And so I started doing practicing out of my basement. We didn't have an office, and I was literally just churning out briefs and doing Zoom hearings and just never getting out of my basement. And I will tell you that my fiance was probably sick of me because he would go to work every day and I was at home in my basement with my two cats. And the minute he got home, I was like, suction cup to him and just wanted to talk, and I think it drove him nuts. And he was just like, "You got to do something different." So then, out of the blue, Professor Mangrum gave me a call. Um, and he said that one of my former schoolmates, somebody I had gone to school with at Creighton Law, had wanted to open a firm. His firm in Salt Lake City, Utah, wanted to open a firm in Omaha, and would I be interested in helping open the office? And I said, "Well, what kind of law is it?" Professor Mangrum told me that it was personal injury, which I knew very little about. I'd never practiced personal injury before, so I was like, I don't think I would be very good at opening an office since I don't even know anything about that area of law really. And so Mangrum encouraged me to meet with Josh Dunyan, that Josh was coming into town and to at least just have lunch with him. So I figured, what will it hurt? So Josh and I went to lunch, and it was very apparent that we are cut from the same cloth. Josh is probably one of the most compassionate people I know. He has a heart of gold. He wants to do right. He'll stay up at night when he thinks that there's a dilemma that he isn't sure the answer to, and I'm the same way. Um, we want to serve the people around us. We care more about doing right by our clients than making money. And so, because of that lunch, I decided to once again change my career and go to the plaintiff side. So I was on the defense side of civil litigation. So now I'm jumping to the plaintiff side. So I've been on both sides of the courtroom for both criminal and civil. So I decided to go ahead and take the leap and start this office in Omaha for a law firm called the Advocates. And so we started that office, and they had already had office space in downtown Omaha. And I was lucky enough to get to do the interior design for the office as we're trying to build clients and get clients. And I will tell you, my time with the Advocates has been amazing. I get the backing of a huge firm in Utah. That's the headquarters. The Advocates, I think, is in like 12 states now. They've been just opening offices in different states very intentionally. They very take a lot of time to handpick attorneys that they know care about the mission of the Advocates. We try to take care of our clients on several different levels, of course, legally, but they do all kinds of special things to show client appreciation. We help clients with, different aspects of their case in ways that I haven't seen other law firms do. So that's a really good thing for that, to be working with that firm, and to have that backing of a big firm. But then I'm also here essentially by myself. We've had one or two other attorneys over time here in Omaha, but it's still kind of, a small office. I have some wonderful staff that are they make my day. I love going to the office and seeing their smiles and hearing their stories, and we support and encourage each other. And that's the backbone of the firm, is just really just the community that we build just inside the firm and treating each other well. And that's uncompromised. Let's see. I took notes because I'm a note taker. So a couple of other things that I wanted to touch on in this introductory session, not just where I'm at as an attorney, and the successes that I've had as an attorney, is kind of my life before law school. And this is a part of me that a lot of people don't know about. Because I've been in Omaha for almost 20 years now, for almost longer than I lived in Texas. I've lived in Omaha, which is really, really sad to me, because if you were born in Texas, you'd understand once you're a Texan, you're always a Texan, no matter how long you live anywhere else. But I want to talk to you a little bit about who I was and what happened before law school. So before law school, I went to undergrad at Buena Vista, which is actually a campus in Storm Lake, Iowa, but they have a satellite campus in Council Bluffs. So in 2001, I moved to Omaha. I had had some school between graduating high school and moving to Omaha. I had gone to college a little bit in Texas. Of course, when I moved here with an ex-boyfriend, that's a story for another day. I a lot of my credits didn't transfer, so I ended up having to go to school at Buena Vista and taking over a bunch of my classes. And during that experience, I met remarkable people. I met Rick McFadden, which you will meet in, I think, the second episode of this podcast. And then I also met Jackie Delahant, and she's no longer with us. She's another person that I wish I could have on this podcast. But later in future podcasts, I'm going to do a in memory podcast, and I'll make sure that Jackie's included in that. But my time at Buena Vista was exceptional, and my major was secondary education, and I wanted to be a teacher. But I decided after having that conversation with Gordy that I wanted to keep going to law school. One thing that I am so grateful for is that I have gotten the opportunity to, even though I've never taught in like a high school setting, which was kind of my initial thought of what would happen when I went to undergrad, I have had the opportunity to teach college classes. So I've taught at Bellevue University and Iowa Western for about 9 years. I've taught at both of those institutions, teaching both face-to-face and online classes. And if anybody out there that's listening is a teacher, I think you might agree with me that sometimes you learn more from your students than you teach them. And that was very true many times in my classes. I was fortunate enough to have students that were non-traditional. So many of them came with their own life experiences, their own work experiences. Some of them were older. They were, established in their careers, but just needed to get their 4-year degree. And we would have the best conversations. I miss those classes. And I also, a large part of when I worked there was when I was at the public defender's office. So I kind of got to talk about some of my cases and get great feedback from them. So it was a great opportunity. And I was so thankful to be able to use my teaching degree in a way that I could teach, on a level with some higher education and get to interact with the students. And I hope to have some of them on this podcast as well. A little bit about my childhood. So this isn't always the easiest part to talk about. I had a great childhood in many ways. I'm originally from a small town in Texas. It's called Adrian. There's about 100 people there. It's outside of Amarillo. It's 23 miles from the New Mexico border, and I think it's beautiful. A lot of people see it as just like a flat tabletop, not many trees. It's almost like the Wild West Dust Bowl. You see all the dust clouds and the tumbleweeds rolling. There's cowboys, like true cowboys, like the ones that have the chaps and the spurs, and you'll see them at the grocery store. But I love it there. I think it's beautiful. I think the landscape is beautiful. At night, you can see more stars than anywhere I've ever been in my life. And so there's many things that were rewarding about my childhood. I grew up in that small town, and I will tell you, I am the product of a village raising a child. Although my parents were wonderful in many ways, they also had their own issues at times. There was some substance abuse in my parents' lives, and you can't be present all the time as a parent when you are dealing with your own issues like that. So I think that's when I first started learning to lean on the people around me. My parents did make sure that we went to church every Sunday. And so at church, I came in contact with a lot of people, especially one Sunday school teacher in specifically that really took care of us. She kind of, me and my brother and sister, and she put us under her wing, and she, made sure that we were taken care of. And then the school experience was amazing. It was second to none because my class had 13 people, and it was the biggest class in like 20 years. And that school that was kindergarten through 12th grade. And so because of that, you get such individualized education from your teachers. And so I had so many great teachers that really
back to
were
my
invested
parents
in my well-being. And so for that, I'm so grateful. And that's when I really started learning to reach out to people when I needed help or when I needed support. I had basketball coaches that were there for me during really hard times. Um, Back to my parents. So I did mention that they had some substance abuse issues, and they were fantastic parents. We always had food on the table, clothes on our back, but there were just times they weren't present in the way that I wish they would have been. Um, but I will tell you that my childhood home is very different than the home I go back to, and that is because my parents, um, modeled for me what it means to overcome your your issues. So, they're both, sober now. They have come so far. They are such loving parents. I talk to them at least my mom almost every day and my dad about once a week or every couple weeks. And my mom is actually the mayor of our little town. She's been the mayor probably for about 6 to 8 years now. And you would think a mayor of 100 people, that doesn't seem like a hard job, but she takes it very seriously. And she has made a lot of improvements in the town, and she really cares about the town. And to see where my mom was when I was a child, um, to what she's become now being the mayor of a town, I know she doesn't give herself enough credit, but she truly has been an example of resilience and not caring what other people think and just moving forward and doing the right thing. I think at one point in my childhood, my parents were probably like the black sheep of the town. And to know that that town then elected her as mayor is just so touching, and I couldn't be more proud of my mom. So, other aspects that I learned from my parents is a very strong work ethic. So even though there were some issues in my childhood, and we might go into those in other podcasts, one thing was they were very hard workers. My dad always had at least 2 jobs. He worked on the railroad, and we had farmland that he took care of on the side. So he wasn't that's one reason he wasn't present a lot because he was working often. But I learned a very strong work ethic, and so for myself, since I've been 14 years old, I've never had less than 2 or 3 jobs. Um, I've always been busy, I've always been work-centered, and I've always known that to get what I want, I have to work for it. And I think that might be a lesson that's lost on a lot of people, but I think it's something that needs to be reinvigorated in our society, that there's really no free handouts, and that to get what you want and to be proud of it, you have to work for it. I've had some really interesting jobs. I've worked as a cook at Stuckey's. Some people probably don't know what Stuckey's is. It's kinda like a truck stop for families along some of the major interstates here, like I-40 is went through Texas, and there was a Stuckey's outside of Adrian, Texas, and I was a cook, there in high school. I also cleaned my aunt's house and both a church. I cleaned the entire church, bathrooms, everything like that during high school so that I'd have money. Um, After high school, when I was in college, I did telemarketing. I delivered magazines and placed them in racks at like Walmart and gas stations. And I was the only girl because there's these big old totes of magazines. I've bartended. While I was bartending, I met one of my favorite people, Holly Jones. She'll be one of the first guests on my podcast. I met her through a friend, but we bartended together too, and the experiences I've had with that girl, she's also resilient and a survivor, and she is probably one of the most hardest working people I know and has been a model for how I want to be. So, through all my experiences, including work and job experiences, I've really met so many people. Um, the importance of family is another huge thing. So I have 2 siblings. I have an older sister named Holly. Um, she's she and I are not the closest in that we don't talk every day. She lives in Texas. We both have our own individual lives, but the one thing about my sister and I that I can say within, you know, for a fact is that both of us would drop anything for each other. And there's been times that we've had to. I know that she's only a phone call away. I know that she'll listen with compassion. And she herself has quite the story to tell. I hope someday she'll join us here because she's been through so much and she has overcome obstacles that I don't think most people could. And then my brother. So my brother and I are super close, to the point where he lives with me. He lives with me right now. He in the last 2 years has gone through a battle. He had addiction issues. He lost everything. I will never forget a day in October of 2023. I was having the best day of my career. I had settled a multi-million dollar mediation. And at that point, my brother had been struggling with addiction, and we didn't know where he was, and I wasn't sure he was even with us anymore. And I get a phone call um, from a shelter, and it was him. And I had previously, whenever he was struggling with addiction, I just tried to find somewhere to fix him, a counselor or rehab, just go somewhere, get fixed, come back, life should be good. And that day I decided I was going to do something different. And I decided that I was going to invest 100% of myself in helping my brother get better. And if he then chose to not take the help and to continue down the path of addiction, then I would have to be 100% done. And so I presented him with the offer of allowing him to live with me, but there would be criteria he would have to follow in addressing his addiction and the why, because there's always that why. Um, and he could not believe that I was going to let him live with me. He could not believe that I was giving him this chance. And it's been over a year now. And not only has he remained sober, but he has become a person who I never even, I don't think he ever believed he could be. I always knew he was capable of it, but he is such a success. He has become a great father. He's remained at the same job this entire time, which was one of the issues of addiction. A lot of times you don't stay at jobs. He's just done tenfold what I thought that he would be able to do in a year and getting sober. And people will come to me and say, "Oh my goodness, that's so wonderful what you've done for your brother." And, I'm sure he just, is so grateful. And, he probably couldn't have done that without you. And that's not true. The thing about that addiction that I've realized is that you have to present the addict with opportunities to succeed, but if they don't want it or if they don't take advantage of those opportunities, they're not gonna succeed. It was nothing that I did. I just I gave him a support, but then he took it and he had to do the hard work and he had to get sober and he has to choose to be sober every day. So all the praise goes to my brother for what he's achieved with his sobriety. And that definitely will be topic of podcasts that come up. I of course want my brother to be on this podcast, and then other people in my life that have helped me realize what it's like to either be an addict or to um, have an addict in your family, and how to navigate that so that hopefully with time they become the best version of themselves. Another big part of this podcast is gonna be relationships. I've been through several difficult ones. I've never been married, I don't have kids, but I had a fiancé. So Walt Secord was and is the love of my life. This man was larger than life. I say was because he passed away on January 23rd, or excuse me, January 27th, 2023. Um, I had been with him for 5 years. We'd known each other for probably 5 to 8 years before that, but we were both either in relationships or whatever. It just, never worked out. I'd never had a conversation with him before we met. Our first date was on Christmas of 2018. That story is a remarkable one that I'll share on a future podcast because it was literally like a Hallmark movie. And if you knew Walt, you wouldn't liken him to a Hallmark movie. He was a big, muscular, loud construction worker, electrician by trade. And I, in the first date with him, saw a softer side of him that I don't even think most of his friends know is there. But for 5 years, we had the best love. I am beyond grateful for the time that I had with Walt. He made me a better person. He made me see life differently. He was like a big kid, and which would drive me nuts sometimes. But I needed that balance in my life. Um, and so having him in my life for 5 years, even though I wish it would have been for 55 years, I'm grateful for the time I had with him. He was such a huge part of my life, and I know he's still with me today. One quick story, things like this happen all the time, but over this past weekend, I was out in the woods because Walt was a huge hunter, was in the woods all the time. We went out in nature constantly. So I'm out in the woods, still trying to, to do the things that Walt taught me. And I'm in this public hunt area, which if anybody knows that, it's like the road less traveled. There's really not trails in these public hunt areas. And I was back in the state park public hunt area. I was with my niece. We walked for like 2 miles, and then we come back to the truck, and we're so proud of of ourselves for accomplishing this walk in the woods. And I go to my pocket and I don't have my keys. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And luckily I had done a map of the trail on an app I have. So we retrace our steps, and in this public hunt area, there was a bunch of trees that were down because in Omaha, we had a terrible windstorm this summer. So we were going over trees and under trees. I'm like, oh, it had to have fallen out. The keys had to have fallen out somewhere there. Sure enough, couldn't find them. I had to call my brother. He brought me my extra set of keys. I was so heartbroken. And I was like, they have to be out there. And my brother, of course, is like, this is a needle in a haystack, Mandy. There's all these leaves down. You're never going to find these keys. So the next day, I'm like, I'm going to give it one more try before I have to go pay hundreds of dollars for a new key fob. So as I drive up to the state park, I get up to the cabin and that like where the office is. And I was like, well, I'm just going to go in there because what if somebody finds them, later on, some hunter, because we're in hunting season, goes out there and finds them. And again, my brother's like, no one's going to find your keys. They're under some log or a bunch of leaves or something. So I go in the office and I walk in and I say, do you guys have a lost and found? And the girl behind the counter says, oh, did you lose some keys? And I was like, yeah. And she shows me the keys and they're my keys. And I think Walt did that. When wonderful things like this happen in my life, I'm always like, he's still looking out for me. He's always looking out for me. Since he's passed away, so many amazing things have happened. So many things that can't just be coincidences. And I always think that's Walt. He's still always looking over me. So there'll be much more about Walt in this podcast because of the impression he left on my life and others. I'll just say at a celebration for life, he had 500 people that showed up. I think that when I pass away, maybe 20 people will show up. I don't know. But if that was a testament to what an amazing person he was a ray of sunshine. The slogan for his celebration for life was always sunny in 75, because that's how he saw life, as if it's always sunny in 75. And that's something I try to carry with me. So back to the podcast. Why are we here? I've told you a little bit, this is going to be a podcast about the people that I've made connections with. What I'm hoping that my listeners get is they get a sense for, some of the stories, some of the things that have happened in my life, but they can feel a connection. Some of these stories, some of these things I've been through will resonate with them. I want them to also listen to the stories of the people that I've connected with, the people that have inspired and supported me. I also hope my listeners then kind of do a little self-evaluation and think about the people that have influenced them. The idea of this podcast started when I was talking with some of my marketing team for the advocates, and they said I should write a book because of all the stories of things that have happened in my life. And I don't have time for a book. So I thought maybe a podcast would be better. But actually, it goes back to when I was in what was called the Leadership Academy with the Nebraska State Bar Association. And it was a workshop for young attorneys to kind of teach us leadership skills. And one of the things that we did was to make a list of all the people that have influenced us in our lives. And I was sitting there, I was making this list, and I had like 25, 30 people on this list. And the guy next to me had 2. And he said, how do you only have 2 people? He said, how do you have like 30 people on a list? And I said, well, how do you only have 2? I told him, I said, think about all the people that over time have given you nuggets of wisdom that you've seen things that they do that you want to exemplify. I said, you have to have more than 2. And he added 3 more names to his list. So I thought that was good. So I'm hoping that you will add names to your list. And that hopefully you'll also want to be a name on somebody else's list, because that's the connection, with our society now. When we're after COVID, things seem to change a little, social media, which is not a bad thing. But we're really that human connection of sitting down and actually having a conversation with your guest. That's what I look forward to. And I also want them to know how grateful I am for them. So the one thing with Walt, when somebody passes away, you always hope, especially with him. I never had that last conversation. And so I want people to know how grateful I am. I think Walt passed away knowing how much I loved him and how grateful I was for him. But I want the people and my guests to know, I want to look them in their eyes and let them know how much they've influenced me and how appreciative I am for what they've done for me throughout my life. One last sentiment on this. So this is Grateful by Lady Law. I'm not Lady Law. I'm not going to name myself Lady Law, but I will name my truck that. So I drive a huge Dodge Ram truck, and Walt drove Dodge Ram trucks. And after he passed away, I realized how much I missed that truck that he drove. He'd let me drive it sometimes. So I decided to go out and buy a truck. And I won't go into the long story right now, but it was very difficult for me as a female to buy a truck, because the salesman didn't seem to believe that I really wanted this big truck. And so it was quite a journey to get the truck. And then once I got the truck, I'd go to gas stations, and I'd be standing there at the pump, and guys would come up to me and say, "Hey, when did y'all get that truck?" Or "Y'all, that's a really nice truck of y'all's." It always had to be y'all, or you, both of you. It always was something where I could tell they didn't think it was just my truck. And so I thought, gosh, I've got to do something so people know that this is a girl's truck. And so I didn't want to put pink on it. Not that there's anything wrong with that. So I thought, I was talking to my mom, and she actually had the idea of the license plate. And then I did some brainstorming, and I thought, Lady Law. And so I applied for that personalized plate in Nebraska. Lo and behold, there was no other Lady Law. So my truck is Lady Law. And that truck exemplifies to me my perseverance to get what I want, my need to be original, and just the connection will always have with Walt, and the connection and gratitude I have to all the people who have made me who I am. So I'm so glad you're here, listening to Grateful by Lady Law. I hope to have many episodes in the future. So please continue to listen and watch, and we will see you in the next podcast. Thank you for listening to another episode of Grateful by Lady Law. Be sure to follow this show on all of your favorite social media platforms. Listen wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. We'll see you next time on Grateful by Lady Law.
A Hurrdat Media Production.